Welcome back to the Cross Border Interview Podcast. My name is Christopher Brown, and we are entering the Ballot Box, a regular segment on our show where we talk about the biggest unknown political story of this year, which is the federal election. We are sitting down with candidates from across Alberta, around Canada, and even here in the great city of Calgary. Today's candidate that is on the show and in the ballot box is Green Party of Canada's candidate for Calgary Centre, Mr. Austin Mullins. Austin, thank you so much for doing this. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So, Austin, I'm going to ask the question that you've been asked before, but I'm going to ask it again. Where does your duty to serve come from?
I was thinking, I remember that you asked me this last time, and I'm curious to see if these answers are going to match up. Maybe it's changed in the last year, but I think it really comes from my family. My mom had me when she was 17, so you can imagine that upbringing was definitely not as a normal one as most people have, and I definitely have witnessed a lot of, I would say, unnecessary suffering. Um, every time I would complain about something, someone in my family would quip up and say, "Oh, life isn't fair." Um, and I remember that didn't never sat well with me, because you don't have to dig too deep or look too far to know that there are people that have the power and the resources to make sure that everything is fair for everyone and everyone has equal opportunity and success. And so I think my duty to serve comes from wanting to be that voice that we don't often see in politics, coming from nothing and so much struggle, I would say, and representing that voice in the halls of power.
Now, you have, as I said in my introduction, you have decided to put your name forward for Calgary Centre for the Green Party of Canada. To kick off the actual fun part of the interview for me, I've got to ask the question in your own words, describe what the Green Party of Canada is.
Ooh, that's a tough one. um, for me, I think the Green Party represents its grassroots, first of all. I was always attracted to the Green Party because it's smaller. Um, and I think we represent, it's evidence-based policy. It's what works. It's not purely ideological based, and of course we are at the Green Party, so we care a lot about the climate and the environment. And I think without, action to revert the climate crisis, none of the other issues really matter, because if we don't have a livable planet, then we don't have a livable planet. So I think the Green Party representing the base issue for me, plus evidence-based policy on everything else that matters to Canadians, and being small and grassroots and listening to the voices from the very bottom. Um, that's what's really important to me, and that's why I was attracted to the Green Party. And I think that's what the Green Party still is, and what I'm fighting to keep the Green Party as. And that's what it means to me.
Now, the Green Party of Canada has two elected MPs right now. You were hoping to add to that electoral success. What are you hearing at the doors in Calgary Centre to give you a little bit of a boost in your step to say, you know what, people are looking for that change and they're looking at the Green Party now today for that potential change to cast their vote in the next upcoming election, the 44th general election, to say, hey, let's send a Green representative to Ottawa.
Right. So I think everyone knows that the Green Party is the party for climate and environment. And I think what really puts that kick in my step, and when I go to the door and I hear someone talk about something that we also have offered in our platform that maybe people don't know so much about. And I think a lot of those issues, I would say, let's say we failed in the past to communicate the full breadth of our platform, because we're very climate, we're very environment, but we do have policy on just about everything. And I would say, people have told me that they want universal childcare. They want to publicize long-term care homes. They want, uh, I've heard even people say like a guaranteed livable income, because there are a lot of people talking about that in the Liberal Party now because they passed it at their convention. And so seeing all of these green policies that we've been talking about for a long time being talked about in the wider political sphere has really kind of put a kick in my step, because I know I can leverage that and take that to the door and say, we've been fighting for this for a long time. And we are, uniquely positioned to continue to fight for it in Ottawa.
Now, you talked about policies that the party has put forward, which is great, and we'll dive a little bit
Mhm.
more into details about those three: universal childcare, long term health, and livable income. But I want to talk about Calgary
Right.
Centre to start with, because that is the
Yeah.
riding that you want to represent. What are the issues that you are hearing at the doors when it comes to riding specific issues? Is it that universal childcare? Is it long term? Is it livable income? Is it transit? What are the issues that the
Right.
people of Calgary Centre are bringing to you that aren't on your policy that you go, hey, I want to talk about that because you want to talk about that?
Right. I think a big one and one that I'm really passionate about and working on right now is harm reduction, safe supply, decriminalization. The Sheldon Schumer site recently, being defunded. And, we have a provincial government that I think is not the most caring and compassionate towards people who are suffering. I'll say it.
Just a little?
Um, and that's really important to me because a lot of the family issues that I talked about earlier, a lot of people in my family suffered from opioid addiction, and my uncle recently passed away just a few weeks ago from the same issue. So it's really important to me, and I have heard people mention it. We had uh, an EDA relaunch for the Calgary Centre Greens, and two people mentioned it as their, top issue. Like, we need to be loud on this, and make a stance and hold every level of government accountable, because harm reduction and safe supply is becoming a bigger issue. Um, you know, Somewhere around 2,000 people died in 2020 from um, opioid addiction and overdose. Um, and so I think we really need to start holding more people accountable to that and get it more, in the dialogue for federal politics as well, because I think the federal government does have a role in that, especially in decriminalization. Um,
One of the big things that has been on the tops of everyone's mind over the last 18 months has been COVID-19. Uh,
mhm.
all across Canada, it is an issue that people are facing with, whether it be reduction in hours because of COVID-19 slowing down work, whether it be closure of the restaurant and tourism industry because of COVID-19 and people aren't coming,
Right.
whether it be being laid off because companies have no need for people right now because they are closed. Is this an issue, and is unemployment a big issue that is facing the people of Calgary Centre? Because you talk to people across Calgary and you hear, I've lost my job because of COVID-19. Are you hearing that at the door?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think it's related to the ones I mentioned earlier, especially for universal childcare. That is a big barrier for a lot of people to getting back into the workforce, especially women. We've seen in the COVID-19 pandemic that we're facing what some economists are calling the she session. There's kind of a disparity between men and women getting back into the workforce because of issues of childcare. Um, so I think that is an important one. And I myself, even I've had a hard time finding a job. I only work part-time right now. My hours are reduced. I get sent home early all the time. So I think it is really difficult. And I only work as a barista. I'm not a fancy lawyer or what most people expect a politician to be. But even I myself am struggling. So I'm living it, and I'm seeing it, and I'm hearing it at the door that people are struggling and they want a path forward out of the pandemic. And I think what I mentioned, universal childcare, guaranteed livable income, are two really big policy planks that can help people in Calgary Centre and beyond.
While universal livable or livable income, basic livable income, is not a
Mhm.
law of the land right now, the federal government has introduced this CERB and CRB, which is the Canadian
Right,
Employment Recovery Benefit and the Canadian Recovery Benefit. This is for small business independent owners. Earlier this
right.
month, Annamie Paul, the leader of the Green Party, came out and said that Justin Trudeau needs to extend CERB, needs to extend it
Right,
because people are still struggling. Are you hearing from
right.
small business owners or independent business owners who are saying, yes, we need it extended because while we are still struggling, we are trying to find jobs. The jobs just aren't there.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I have heard even from my own boss that he feels that if we kept those programs going, it'd be easier for him to retain his employees because they would feel more comfortable in their job security. So, that's one voice, but, and I think people have been saying that CERB has caused people to, just sit at home and not want to go back to work. But CERB ended in fall of 2020, and now we're in July of 2021. So I don't think CERB has really had an effect on, people's employment kind of mindset now, almost a year later. Anime Paul has, throughout the pandemic said we need to continue these supports. We need to even up them and transition the CERB into a guaranteed livable income. And I think it's possible. It's so possible, and it would be so beneficial to so many people. Um, and a lot of people think of these programs as, very in the same economic mindset that we've always been in, where it's about getting people, back to work. But I think there are other ways of work that are also valuable in society that we need to put more emphasis on. If people can be paid to make art, or people can be made to ensure local food security in their communities, I think those are just as important as having a robust workforce. And a guaranteed livable income would help us get there.
And I completely understand that. I know people who have used CERB, who are still using CRB because
Hmm.
they're struggling and they're trying to find that job. And I want to jump into that universal child care.
Right,
The federal government has come out with their plan for universal child care. While it's not universal, it
right,
is, hey, $10 a day daycare for any province who wants to sign on, and the federal government will match it. Um,
right.
this goes a little bit to that extent to getting people back to work and getting people
Hmm.
proper, adequate health daycare for their children. Would you like to see the federal government, and I know you're green and they're liberals, and it's probably going to be hard to convince them to do something that they don't want to do, or convince them to even try to do something, but do you
Right.
want to see them go even further with this? Because while $10 a day is great, people are struggling right now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'll credit where credit is due. I think the $10 a day is a really good start. Even in just, the way people respond to certain policy and how people react to it, it's a good way to kind of step into it and say, this is working. We have evidence that this is working and getting people back into the workforce. And so I welcome it, the $10 a day, because it will give more wind in the sails to even going even further and making it universal for everyone. Um, and I think it's possible. There are liberal MPs who support a guaranteed livable income, and there are liberal MPs who support universal childcare going all the way. So I think with the political will and the evidence that it will work, it'll happen.
I want to turn to the party now. I want to turn to the party because I love talking about policy, but I am cautious of time and I want to make sure that we get in all of our questions.
Yeah,
The
of course.
Green Party is a party, like you said, they have great policies, but they are identified usually as the Green Party, the hey, we are the
Right.
environment party. In your own words, what is the biggest misconception about the Green Party that you would like to address, and I'd like to tell the people who are listening to this and to the voters of Calgary Centre that, hey, you might think the Green Party is this, but we're actually not.
Right. So I think the biggest one is a lot of people think that we are the colloquial Tories on bicycles. A lot of conservatives who like to garden, or conservatives who really care about the environment. And I think we do have those people because we are, I would say, a big tent party where we bring everyone who cares about the environment and cares about climate change. But I think, especially for me and all the Greens that I work with, we are a solidly leftist party. I'm an eco-socialist. All the Greens I work closely with identify as an eco-socialist. And we are on the solid left of this political spectrum, and we're fighting the same fight that, the NDP is fighting. Um, and, we have these buzzwords like fiscal responsibility that I think kind of throw people off. Um, and we still, that is a value of fiscal responsibility, but fiscal responsibility doesn't mean fiscal austerity. And I
So
think people kind
I
of
gotta
mix
follow
those
up with
two.
that because
Yeah,
every time a politician uses the word fiscal responsibility, the first thing I think
yeah,
is, what are they talking about? Like, what does
right,
fiscal responsibility mean to you, the candidate for
right,
Calgary Centre? Because I would love to know, and I ask this to everyone who has it on their website or even mentions the word fiscal responsibility. What does
right.
it mean?
For me, it means that, we have all these really expensive policies like universal childcare, guaranteed livable income, universal pharmacare, dental care, national mental health strategy. These are all like big ticket, expensive policies, but they match with a wealth tax, tax on e-commerce corporations, higher taxes across the board for corporations, no more uh, handouts for corporations or tax breaks for large corporations. It comes, if we're going to spend all this money to ensure that people have all the tools they need to succeed, then we also need to have the money to spend it. And I think fiscal responsibility is, I'm not saying that we're going to drive us into huge debt. So we're going to balance it with wealth tax and all of these other policies to bring that income in.
One of the biggest misconceptions, I wouldn't say misconceptions, but one of the biggest things that you have to overcome in this election, and we'll talk about the election here soon, but one of the biggest things that you
Sure.
might have to overcome in this election is the Green Party, and I'm saying this as the devil's advocate here because I want to hear what you want to
Sure.
have to say about this. The Green Party is anti-oil. The Green Party is anti-Alberta because they want to keep our oil in the ground, and the workers are going to lose their jobs if we elect the Green Party. What do you say to those people who are saying that the Green Party is going to destroy, and I'm using, yet again, using their words, I'm not
Yeah,
saying
no,
this
I get it.
myself, but the Green Party would destroy Alberta's economy if elected?
I would say that I feel for that sentiment because, and I'm going to be 100% honest here, I felt that Greens in Alberta are often not served as well as Greens in, say, urban centers like Vancouver or Toronto in the way that our platform is communicated. And I've griped about that for a couple years now. And our platform in the past has always been to speak to those people in urban centers and not so much to the people in Alberta. Um, and I think our platform does have what we call the just transition, where we if we're going to end oil, then we're also going to put all these programs in place to ensure that the workers and the people who depend on those industries are taken care of and that they can transition to renewable energy sources. But I feel for it because I myself don't see a strong enough platform to address those concerns in our party platform, but it is something that I've been fighting for and asking for from our leadership.
And this goes back to the idea that you mentioned when you talked about what the Green Party is, in your opinion, in your own words, of
Right.
a grassroots party, right? You talked about
Right.
how it is a grassroots party, and
Hmm.
what you're saying is being heard at the party level, and hopefully will be changing this election because you do have a new
Yeah.
leader.
Right.
I just want to mention for my listeners and to the viewers, when I had Anime Paul, the candidate for the Green Party leadership back in 2020, I feel like this year has completely
Hmm.
just not sure what
A
day it is.
decade ago.
Exactly. She did say that her brother works in the oil and gas industry,
Yeah.
so she does not want to see him unemployed. So, and I
Right.
say that just because I want to clarify that she has been on the show and she did mention that she does support transition from the oil and gas industry. But thank you, Austin, for your own opinion on that. Um,
Right.
I want to talk about the 44th general election here, the
Sure.
big elephant in the room. You are
Yes.
basically you were acclaimed last Tuesday or last Wednesday,
Hmm.
sorry, as the candidate. You are now in a state of eternal campaigning until an election drop. This is going to
Yes.
be challenging because in Calgary there is a municipal election going on. How have you had to change your campaign methods and campaign ways due to the unknown certainty of when a campaign is going to happen, COVID-19, and also the municipal election?
Right. Well, I think, the biggest thing is having a timeline. Not having a timeline is very difficult because it's hard to say we're going to do this at this time and this at this time, really space ourselves out and have a concrete strategy going forward. So that's been very difficult to plan, motivating people because it's summertime and everyone is, stressed about the, climate anxiety and, the wildfires in BC. It's been really difficult to get people like motivated to want to, step up for these issues and volunteer. And, The Green Party, of course, especially in Alberta, is a very small party. We have very limited resources. So making decisions on how to leverage our very limited resources for the best possible impact without knowing when the election might be is very difficult, because we could spend all this money and then, maybe Trudeau decides to call an election next year. And, that would be very frustrating and very difficult.
Um, I want to talk about Calgary Centre. You are currently represented by a Conservative MP. Um,
Yeah.
are you hearing things at the door that makes you think, okay, he has not been representing Calgary Centre to the best of his ability? He is bringing the word of Erin O'Toole to the riding and not the word of the riding to Ottawa or Erin O'Toole. What are you hearing about the current MP that makes you think, you know what, people are looking for that change now because he has not been addressing these issues?
Um, so I think maybe even the opposite of that is that I've not heard one person even mention him. And I think that's even worse than people. I haven't heard people say anything about him. And I think that maybe shows that there's sort of a lack of a presence, or he's not as known, which makes sense because he was first elected in 2019 and we've only had, you know, it hasn't been very long since he's been our MP. But I haven't heard anyone say anything about him. But what I have heard is people mentioning a lot of policy that I don't think that the Conservatives have ever offered. So people are saying we want this, we want that, and I've never kind of heard that commitment from Conservatives. So it's really beneficial to me because I can say, well, we've offered this and other parties have offered this, but our current MP has not offered this. Um, yeah, I think just in the fact that I haven't heard anyone mention him is, I
Now,
think, speaks for
uh,
itself.
candidates like yourself are political observers. You watch politics,
Mhm.
and some might not, but I feel like I can adequately say and honestly say that you are a political observer, whether it be here in Alberta or in Canada. Um, if you had the chance to be in Greg McLean's, the current MP for Calgary Centre's seat, what would you have done differently over the last 2.5 years since 2019 if you were elected in Calgary Centre? Because he's had to make some decisions that, yet again, might go against the people of Calgary Centre. But what would you have done differently to represent your constituents a little bit better if you were elected in 2019?
I think I would be, just as loud on all the things that I've mentioned so far in the interview, especially on the post-pandemic recovery and making sure that everyone has the tools as we come out of the pandemic to succeed. And I would be extremely loud and I would make sure people know that there's someone in the halls of power saying, you are going to be fine. We're going to get you out of this. And we're going to, fight for things like a guaranteed livable income and universal childcare so that when we get out of the pandemic, you don't have to worry about those day-to-day things that are so difficult for so many people.
Now, I would usually ask this question knowing the date of an election, but as we've mentioned in this interview and on many interviews that I've done, we do not know when this
Right.
federal election is going to be held. So I need you to put your time machine hat on and put yourself the day after the election. Day after the election, what is priority one for the Austin Mullins MP, because you are now the newly elected MP for Calgary Centre? What is priority number one?
Ooh, that is a difficult one. I think it keeps coming back. So I think I would definitely go into the halls of power and say, we need a guaranteed livable income. That is something that's like really deep for me because I think it opens up people to so many more opportunities and especially in mental health and other areas. So I think priority number one would be for me to go in there and just be loud and say we need to transition all the supports that we had during the pandemic into a guaranteed livable income so that we can move forward as a country and especially, and it would definitely help people in Calgary Centre. And then I think priority number one would be to just listen to people in Calgary Centre and say, okay, I'm your MP. I'm new. I'm the first Green MP in Alberta, hopefully. What can I do for you in Calgary Centre and what can I do for Alberta that's going to best serve you?
Um, if elected, you will have to represent all constituents. And
Yeah,
Some constituents may completely disagree with you, but you will have to deal with them.
right.
Explain to me how you have addressed concerns from people that may disagree with you in a way that would make Calgary Centre people feel, while we have a Green MP, I still feel like he's still representing me even though I didn't vote for him.
Right. So I think the biggest one is that the Green Party of Canada in our constitution, we don't whip our votes. So every Green MP is free to represent their riding in the House of Commons before the party. So if ever something came up that I felt maybe was Green policy or was policy of the day that I felt didn't serve Calgary Centre appropriately, I wouldn't have to vote for that, and I would have the freedom to do that. Um, I also think what I mentioned earlier, where I've been very openly um, critic critical of our platform in the ways that it, fails to address the concerns of Alberta. And I think what that means in a majority voting conservative province is that it fails to address the concerns of conservative voters. And so I've been very critical of that. And I hear those concerns that they have. And I think you know, the messaging that you have when you're trying to get elected and the messaging you have once you get elected is very different. So I think it is very possible to transition as an MP to a more neutral stance and say, yes, I believe in these core things because I am a Green, but I have the capacity to change my mind, to listen and learn and, represent what I think is best for Calgary Centre based on what I'm hearing as we go.
Sometimes you will have to vote your conscience. And I say that
Yeah,
with all respect because sometimes your constituents may want one thing, but at the deep down in your heart, you may believe
right,
another thing. In that situation, how do you address the back and forth, the pull between representing your people and representing what
right,
you believe in? Because I understand that they're not with votes. You can vote your
right,
conscience, but at the same
right,
time, sometimes, let's be honest, and I take this as in all sincerity because C6 has been the big topic on a lot of people's discussion.
right,
I forget the name of the bill, but it's the conversion therapy bill. Some people
right.
do not agree with that. There are some ridings in this province who are strongly against that. I'm assuming you are for this bill because conversion therapy is a barbaric tool, and I do not understand why it's still happening. In that
Yeah,
situation, I know Greg, I believe, voted for it. How do you
yes.
balance that where you say, okay, I understand you guys don't want this, but I have to vote for it because it is the ethical thing to do?
Right. So I think I'll step back and say on issues like that where it's about human rights and like the dignity of human beings, I think there is no room for debate or argument. I'm standing up and saying I support human rights, I support queer people, women's rights, anti-racism, anti-discrimination, and Indigenous reconciliation. Um, so I don't think there would ever be a situation where I would get elected and have a majority of people in my riding disagree with all of those things because I am standing up for those wholeheartedly, and there's no room for debate. So I think on if anything like that ever came up and I was the MP, then it would pretty much be this is how I'm voting, this is what I believe in, that's the end of it.
I want to mention, I want to ask you something because you brought it up, and yet again, this is the great thing about these interviews. I let the guests dictate the where we're going in the interview, but
Sure.
Aboriginal Indigenous issues have been a issue that has been on the top of everyone's mind,
Right.
and the words that are coming out of every politician's mouth. Where does your party stand on residential school? Uh, I don't want to say on residential schools because I'm assuming you are against them and you think they are genocide, but um,
Yes.
how we have to better implement the Truth and Reconciliation mandate, but also how does your party stand on working with our Indigenous neighbors to better address their needs and wants?
Yeah, so the Green Party has always advocated for, implementing UNDRIP into federal law, which has happened, which is great. And then of
For
course
those who don't
prioritizing
know,
all.
that is the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. Continue. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's okay. And then of course, prioritizing all 93 calls to actions from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, following through on the recommendations of the, Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls report. All these things are, I would say, like they seem very big and very kind of um, substantial, but I think they are the bare minimum. Um,
Are
and a
people
lot of the
talking
Green
about
Party,
it at the door?
I haven't heard it so far. I don't know. I think a lot of people are experiencing, it's hard for people to find the capacity to, think about something that they're not directly experiencing when they're experiencing, day-to-day struggles like how do I find childcare? How do I, get back into the workforce? How do I pay for my tuition? Things like that. So I think we have to keep talking about it to keep it in people's minds. And I absolutely will. I recognize that I am white, so it is my responsibility to keep this conversation going and to advocate for the right um, people and to uplift those voices that need to be uplifted. But I think the Green Party platform, all throughout the platform, we mention Indigenous consultation, where self-determination is the key, where they get to decide what works for them and it can't be dictated to them. Um, and I would follow through with that.
No, and for my listeners and to the people who are tuning into the live stream, I want to thank Austin Mullins for tuning in, for not tuning in, for being our guest on the show today. He's the Calgary Centre Green Party of Canada candidate. I want to talk about you now for a second. How do
Sure.
you, not how do you, I want to ask this question. Why should you be the next MP, Member of Parliament, for the riding of Calgary Centre?
I think I represent something new and fresh that we don't see often in politics. I'm 23, I'm queer, I come from a very poor family. Um, and those things are pretty much the opposite of what we see typically in politics. And I think for me to be able to represent, a downtown urban center in the halls of power and say, we exist, these voices exist, and we need support for them. I think that would be really important. And it's not so much about me, but what I represent, which I think, is the future, where we need more voices who actually have a stake in the future, especially for climate change and, reconciliation and all of these things that we want to see as we move forward. Um, so I think I represent sort of the future that we're all moving towards, but we're not getting there as quickly because we don't have enough of the voices that have a real stake in that future in the halls of power.
Now, in order to be the successful candidate in X election, because yet again, we don't know when that election is going to be, Justin Trudeau, please just drop the election date. We would be all
Please.
happy if we could do that. That'd be greatly appreciated. But
Uh-huh.
in order to do that, you need volunteers. You need people to come out and help you. So, how can
Right.
people learn a little bit more about you? How can people get involved in your campaign? Because I want to take that moment and I let everyone say this, but how do people get in contact and get involved?
Yeah, so I think the platform I'm most active on is Twitter. So my handle is Ausjer Mullins, AUSJER Mullins. You can go on there, follow me. That's where I'm most active and the loudest, and always commenting on issues of the day and giving updates about my campaign. And then also email me austin.mullins@greenparty.ca. Um, that's probably the most direct way to get in contact with me. And you can also just go to the Green Party website and sign up to volunteer. And no matter where if you, as long as you put in your postal code, it'll send an email right to me and then I can get in contact with you.
For my listeners and to my viewers, the links to Austin's email, the Green Party website, his Twitter account, and yes, he did not mention it, but I'm going to throw it out there. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as well are in the show notes. They are in the show notes on the YouTube version of the show and in the audio version that will be released. Well, for that will be tomorrow, but it will be today when you're listening to this, if you're listening to it. So if you haven't already, go in, check it out. I highly recommend that you get involved. This election, while this is the most journalist thing to say about any election, is an important election. It is the election about the future of our country. But get involved. Austin, I want to thank you for sitting down and doing this. This has been fun. It's been enlightening, and it's always great to hear from candidates themselves in a one-on-one setting because I know as much as you want to door knock on every door, it's probably going to be hard during a pandemic.
Yes, that is true. That's another challenge for sure.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, thank you for
everyone.
having
Oh,
me on.
yeah. Thank you so much once again. And to my listeners and to my viewers, yet again, all the links will be in the show notes. Please check them out and hit the subscribe button. I keep on forgetting to say this, but hit the subscribe button on our show as well, because you want to follow us as well. We will be back on Thursday for another live episode with another candidate in Calgary Centre. So, Austin, thank you so much once again and greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.